"What are you doing? Get away from him. Right now." Richard Miller walked through his front door and froze. His son sat on the staircase, face bruised and swollen, and the maid had her hands all over him. The briefcase hit the floor. Oliver sat on the third step, trembling. His face was marked red welts across his cheek, a fresh bruise darkening near his temple. And Linda Baker, the woman Richard hired just 2 weeks ago, had both hands cupped around the boy's face, fingers moving in strange, deliberate patterns. Oliver wasn't screaming, wasn't pulling away. He was watching her like she was the only person in the world. Richard's heart slammed against his chest. "Step back," he said, voice sharp as broken glass. Linda's hands dropped. Oliver flinched. "Daddy." "Come here, Oliver. Now." The boy hesitated. That split second of hesitation cut deeper than Richard expected. Oliver finally moved. Richard pulled him close, hands checking his face, his arms, looking for more damage. "Did she do this to you?" Oliver shook his head. "No, she was helping." "Helping?" Richard's eyes locked on Linda. "My son has bruises all over his face, and you were... What exactly were you doing?" Linda's voice stayed calm, but her hands trembled. "Mr. Miller, if you'd just listen." "Listen to what?" His voice rose. "You've been here 2 weeks, and I walk in to find my son hurt, and your hands all over him." "She was teaching me," Oliver said, voice cracking, "how to talk to Ethan. He's deaf, and nobody understands him, and he pushed me because..." Richard froze. "Wait, someone at school did this?" Oliver nodded. Richard turned to Linda, jaw clenched. "And you knew?" Linda lifted her chin. "He asked me not to tell you. That's not your decision to make." Silence cracked between them like breaking ice. "You're right," Linda said quietly. "I'm just the help." She turned and walked away. Richard stood there, Oliver clinging to him, and realized something that made his stomach turn. He didn't know his son at all. And the woman he'd just destroyed? She might have been the only one who did. Before we continue, like this video, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because this story is about to show you something powerful, that God puts people in our lives exactly when we need them, even when we're too blind to see it. Richard held Oliver at arm's length, studying his face. The bruises looked a few days old, faded purple around the edges, yellowish in the center. His son had been walking around like this, and Richard had no idea. "How long has this been going on?" His voice came out quieter than he intended. Oliver stared at the floor. "Last Thursday, during recess." "Thursday?" Richard's mind raced. "That was almost a week ago. Why didn't anyone call me? The school? Your teacher?" Oliver's shoulders drew up toward his ears. "I didn't tell them." "Why not?" Silence. Richard glanced toward the hallway where Linda had disappeared, then back to his son. "Oliver, I need you to talk to me." "Who's Ethan?" Oliver's voice came out small. "A boy in my class. He's 8. He can't hear anything and nobody knows how to talk to him, so he just sits by himself at lunch, and sometimes he gets really mad." "Mad enough to hit you?" "He didn't hit me." Oliver looked up, eyes defensive. "He pushed me. I fell into the brick wall by the playground. It was an accident." Richard's jaw tightened. "Accident or not, he hurt you." "He didn't mean to, Daddy. He was just..." Oliver's voice cracked. "He was frustrated. Nobody understands him. Ever. That's not your problem to fix." "But what if it is?" Oliver's eyes filled with tears. "What if God put me there to help him?" The words hit Richard sideways. He opened his mouth, closed it. "Linda said that sometimes God uses regular people to show his love," Oliver continued, wiping his nose. "She said that's what her brother needed when he was little. Someone to just try." "Her brother?" Oliver nodded. "He's deaf too. Linda showed me pictures. She said he used to get in trouble all the time until someone learned sign language for him, so I asked her if she could teach me, for Ethan." Richard sat back on his heels, trying to process. The strange hand movements, the way Oliver had been so focused on Linda's fingers. It wasn't harm. It was. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" Oliver looked away. "You're always tired when you get home, and you look sad a lot. I didn't want to make it worse." The words cut deeper than the bruises on Oliver's face. Richard pulled his son close, throat tight. "You could never make anything worse, buddy. You hear me?" Oliver buried his face in Richard's shoulder. But even as Richard held him, a sick feeling settled in his stomach. He'd accused Linda of hurting his son. He'd looked at her, like she was a threat. And all she'd been doing was answering a 7-year-old's prayer. Richard closed his eyes. What had he done? Richard found Linda in the small room off the kitchen, the one that came with the job. Her suitcase lay open on the bed, half filled with neatly folded clothes. She didn't look up when he knocked. "Linda, I'll be gone by morning," she said quietly, placing a stack of books into the bag. "Wait." Richard stepped inside. "Oliver told me. About Ethan. About the sign language." Linda's hands stilled, but she didn't turn around. "I jumped to conclusions," Richard continued. "I saw the bruises and I thought—" He stopped. "I'm sorry." Linda finally looked at him. Her eyes were tired. "You don't have to apologize for protecting your son, Mr. Miller. I wasn't protecting him. I was accusing you." She turned back to her packing. "You saw what you saw. I understand." "Do you?" Richard's voice dropped. "Because I'm trying to figure out why I reacted that way, and I don't like the answer." Linda's shoulders tensed. "What answer? You tell me." He leaned against the doorframe. "Would I have reacted the same if you looked different? If you were older? Or white?" Linda turned slowly. "Is that what you're asking?" Richard didn't answer. Linda sat on the edge of the bed. "Mr. Miller, I've been the help in a lot of homes. I know how this works. You hired me to clean and watch Oliver while you're at work. You didn't hire me to care about him, but you do." "Yes." Her voice cracked slightly. "I do." "Why?" Linda looked down at her hands. "My little brother Danny was deaf. Growing up, I watched people treat him like he was broken. Teachers gave up on him, kids avoided him, and he'd come home crying because nobody wanted to try." She wiped her eyes quickly. "When Oliver came to me asking how to talk to Ethan, I saw Danny. I saw a chance to do for someone else's brother what I wished the world had done for mine." Richard's throat tightened. "Where's Danny now?" "He died 2 years ago. Car accident." "God, Linda." Don't." She stood, reaching for the suitcase. "I knew what I was doing when I taught Oliver without asking you. I knew it could cost me this job. But some things matter more than a paycheck." She zipped the bag closed. Richard's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. "Westridge Preparatory Academy." His heart dropped. "It's Oliver's school," he said. Linda looked up, fear flashing across her face. Richard answered. "This is Richard Miller." The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Mr. Miller, this is Principal Hartman. We need you to come in first thing tomorrow morning. There's been an incident involving your son." Richard barely slept. He sat in Oliver's room most of the night, watching his son breathe, trying to remember the last time they'd really talked, really listened to each other. Morning came too fast. Linda was still there. She'd unpacked sometime in the night. Richard heard her moving around the kitchen at 5 a.m., making coffee like nothing had changed. "I'll take him to school," Richard said when Oliver came downstairs. Linda nodded, pouring juice into Oliver's cup. "Principal Hartman's expecting you at 8:30. "How do you know?" "I called her last night. Told her you'd be there." Oliver ate his breakfast quietly, eyes darting between them. He looked small in his chair, fragile in a way Richard hadn't noticed before. The drive to Westridge Preparatory was silent, except for the hum of the engine. Oliver pressed his forehead against the window, watching trees blur past. "Am I in trouble?" he finally asked. "No, buddy. I just need to talk to your principal about what happened." "Are you going to tell them about Ethan?" Richard glanced in the rearview mirror. "Should I?" Oliver's reflection looked scared. "He'll get expelled. They always expel him." "Always?" "He's been to 4 schools already," his mum told Linda. Richard's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "When did you meet his mum?" "I didn't, but Linda did. At pickup last week." "Of course she did." Principal Hartman's office smelled like old books and air freshener. She was in her 50s, grey hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose. "Mr. Miller, thank you for coming." She gestured to a chair. "I'll get right to it. We've had multiple complaints about a student in Oliver's class. Ethan Torres. He's been physical with other children, and last week your son was injured." "I'm aware." "You are?" She looked surprised. "Because we have no record of you being notified." "Oliver didn't report it." Principal Hartman frowned. "Well, several other parents have. And frankly, Mr. Miller, we're not equipped to handle a child with Ethan's needs. We've recommended his mother find a specialized school, but she's resistant." "What kind of needs?" "He's profoundly deaf, non-verbal. He has an IEP, but without a dedicated interpreter, which we can't afford. He's struggling, and when he struggles, he lashes out. Richard leaned forward. Has anyone tried to communicate with him? In his language? Principal Hartman blinked. I'm sorry? Sign language. Has anyone here learned sign language? Mr. Miller, we have 200 students, and my son learned it in 3 days. The principal's mouth opened slightly. A 7-year-old learned enough sign language in 3 days to try to talk to this kid, Richard continued, voice steady. And you're telling me a school full of adults can't figure it out? Principal Hartman's face flushed. With all due respect. The office door opened. A woman stepped in, late 30s, exhausted eyes, work uniform still on. She looked like she'd come straight from a night shift. I'm sorry I'm late, she said breathlessly. Traffic was. She stopped when she saw Richard. Who are you? Principal Hartman stood. Mrs. Torres? You're Oliver's father, the woman said, eyes filling with tears. And Richard realized this was Ethan's mother. Mrs. Torres stood in the doorway, hands gripping her purse strap like it was the only thing holding her together. I'm so sorry, she said, looking directly at Richard. I heard what happened to Oliver. I tried to get Ethan to apologize, but he doesn't. He can't. Her voice broke. He doesn't know how to say sorry in a way people understand. Richard stood slowly. Mrs. Torres, please. She held up a hand. Let me finish. I know you're angry. Every parent is angry. And I get it. I do. But he's not a bad kid. He's just... Tears spilled down her cheeks. He's just so alone. Principal Hartman cleared her throat. Mrs. Torres, we've discussed this before. Westridge simply doesn't have the resources. I know what you have. Mrs. Torres's voice hardened. I know what you don't have. You've made that very clear. We're trying to do what's best for all students, except mine. The words landed heavy in the room. Richard looked at this woman, really looked at her. The uniform that said she'd worked all night. The lines around her eyes that spoke of years carrying weight nobody should carry alone. The way she stood like she was bracing for another rejection. How old is Ethan? Richard asked quietly. Mrs. Torres blinked, surprised he was speaking to her. 8. He turns 9 in January. And he's been to 4 schools. She nodded, wiping her face. They all say the same thing. We're not equipped. He needs specialized care. Like my son is some kind of problem that needs to be fixed instead of a child who needs to be understood. Mrs. Torres, Principal Hartman began. No one is saying, yes, you are. Mrs. Torres's voice shook. You've been saying it since October, and now you want me to pull him out so you don't have to deal with him anymore. Richard's chest tightened. He thought about Oliver's bruises, about the fear in his son's voice when he said Ethan would get expelled, about Linda teaching sign language in secret because she knew this is how it would go. What if someone here learned? Richard said. Both women turned to him. Learned what? Principal Hartman asked. Sign language. What if someone on staff learned enough to communicate with Ethan? Mrs. Torres stared at him like he'd just spoken a language she didn't understand. Principal Hartman shook her head. Mr. Miller, that would require hiring. I'll pay for it. Silence filled the office. You'll what? The principal said. Richard looked at Mrs. Torres. Her hand had moved to her mouth, eyes wide. I'll fund whatever you need. Interpreter, training, whatever it takes. Why would you do that? Mrs. Torres whispered. Richard thought about Linda, about Oliver, about the way his son had looked at him last night, hopeful and terrified at the same time. Because my son asked me to. Mrs. Torres's face crumpled. She covered her mouth with both hands, shoulders shaking, and Principal Hartman sat back in her chair, stunned into silence. But Richard wasn't finished. There's one condition, he said. The woman who's been teaching my son sign language, Richard said. Linda Baker. She's the one who trains your staff. Principal Hartman's eyebrows lifted. Your housekeeper? She's not just... Richard stopped himself. She worked at the Boston School for the Deaf for 5 years. Her brother was deaf. If anyone can help Ethan, it's her. Mrs. Torres looked at him like he'd just offered her oxygen. The woman who talked to me at pickup? The one who signed Beautiful Boy to Ethan? Richard's breath caught. She did? Last Tuesday. Ethan came home and wouldn't stop smiling. I didn't know why until he showed me the sign. Mrs. Torres's voice trembled. Nobody's ever done that. Nobody's ever just seen him. Principal Hartman folded her hands on the desk. Mr. Miller, while I appreciate the offer, we'd need to vet her credentials, run background checks, then do it. Richard pulled out his phone. I'll have my lawyer send over everything you need by noon. This is highly irregular. So is expelling an 8-year-old for being deaf. The principal's face flushed. That's not what isn't it? Richard's voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath. Because that's what it sounds like to me, and I'm guessing that's what it sounds like to every parent in this building whose child is different. Mrs. Torres pressed her hand to her chest, tears streaming freely now. Principal Hartman stood. I'll need to discuss this with the board. You do that. Richard handed her his business card. You have until Friday. After that, I'm pulling Oliver and enrolling him somewhere that actually cares about all their students. The principal's mouth opened, then closed. Richard turned to Mrs. Torres. Can I meet him? Ethan. She looked startled. You want to meet my son? If that's okay. Why? Because Oliver's been asking about him every night for a week. And I think, Richard's voice softened, I think maybe my son sees something I've been missing. Mrs. Torres nodded, wiping her eyes. He's in the resource room. They keep him separated during morning activities. Separated. Her face said everything her words didn't. Richard followed her down the hallway, past bright classrooms full of children's laughter, past artwork taped to walls, past everything that should have included every child. Mrs. Torres stopped at a door at the end of the hall. Through the small window, Richard could see a little boy sitting alone at a table, drawing with fierce concentration. That's Ethan, she whispered. Richard watched him, dark, curly hair, small hands gripping a crayon. The same age as Oliver, but carrying weight no child should carry. And then Ethan looked up. Their eyes met through the glass, and Richard saw something in that boy's face that made his heart stop. The same loneliness he'd seen in Oliver's eyes every single day for 3 years. Mrs. Torres opened the door quietly. Ethan didn't look up, he was too focused on his drawing. Richard stepped inside, and the boy's head snapped toward him. His eyes went wide, then dark, defensive. It's okay, baby, Mrs. Torres signed as she spoke. This is Oliver's daddy. Ethan's expression shifted. He pointed at Richard, then made a sign Richard didn't understand. He's asking if you're the one who's always working, Mrs. Torres translated, her voice soft. The words hit Richard like a fist to the chest. Yes, he said, then felt stupid because Ethan couldn't hear him. Mrs. Torres signed his answer. Ethan stared at Richard for a long moment, then went back to his drawing. Can I see? Richard asked, moving closer. Ethan hesitated, then slid the paper toward him. It was a picture of 2 boys. One had dark curly hair, Ethan. The other had lighter hair and was holding what looked like a baseball. Between them, a woman with kind eyes and dark skin held both their hands. Richard's throat went tight. Is that Linda? Mrs. Torres looked at the drawing, then at Richard. He draws her every day. She's the only adult who's ever tried to talk to him here. Richard stared at the picture, at the way Ethan had drawn Linda's smile, at the way the 2 boys stood close together, not separated by silence or fear. How many times has she come here? Just once. Last Tuesday at pickup. She saw Ethan standing alone and she, Mrs. Torres's voice cracked. She walked right up to him and signed, Hello, friend. He didn't know what to do. Nobody's ever called him friend before. Richard's chest ached. And your son, Mrs. Torres continued. Oliver. Ethan drew him too, because Oliver smiled at him in class last Thursday. Just smiled. That's it. But to Ethan, that was everything. Richard looked at this little boy who'd been labeled dangerous, violent, a problem to be removed, and all he saw was a child who'd been screaming in silence, waiting for anyone to hear him. I fired her, Richard said quietly. Mrs. Torres's head snapped up. What? Last night, I told Linda to leave. I thought he couldn't finish. You thought she hurt Oliver? Richard nodded, shame burning through him. Mrs. Torres stepped closer. Mr. Miller, that woman is the only reason my son still believes the world isn't against him. If you fired her, her voice shook, you didn't just take away his teacher, you took away his hope. Richard's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his blood went cold. It was Linda. The message read, I'm sorry. I can't stay. Tell Oliver I'll pray for him every day. Tell him God has a plan. She was leaving. Right now. and Richard had no idea if he could stop her. Richard didn't remember saying goodbye to Mrs. Torres, didn't remember running through the hallway or pushing through the front doors of Westridge Preparatory. He just ran. His hands shook as he dialed Linda's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. The drive home took 12 minutes. It felt like hours. Please, God, please let her still be there. He didn't know when he'd started praying again. Hadn't prayed since Catherine's funeral. But the words came anyway, desperate and raw. The house appeared around the corner. Linda's car was still in the driveway. Richard slammed the brakes, barely putting the car in park before he was out and running toward the front door. She stood in the entryway, suitcase at her feet, keys in her hand. Linda, she turned. Her eyes were red, but her face was calm, resolved. Mr. Miller, I left instructions for Oliver's meals in the kitchen. His doctor's number is on the fridge. He needs... Don't. Richard's voice came out broken. Please, don't go. Linda's jaw tightened. We both know this isn't working. You're right. It's not. Because I've been blind and stupid and... He stopped, trying to catch his breath. I just met Ethan. Something flickered across her face. He drew a picture of you, Richard continued. You and Oliver and him, together. And his mother told me. His voice cracked. She told me, you're the only person who's ever called her son, friend. Linda looked away, tears sliding down her cheeks. I accused you of the one thing you'd never do, Richard said. I looked at you like you were a threat when you were the answer to a prayer I didn't even know I was supposed to be praying. Mr. Miller, Richard. My name is Richard. She met his eyes. I don't deserve you staying, he said. I know that, but Oliver does, and Ethan does, and maybe, he swallowed hard, maybe God didn't just put you in this house for my son. Maybe he put you here for all of us. Linda's hand trembled on her suitcase handle. I called the school, Richard continued. Told them you'd train their staff, told them I'd fund everything, interpreter, resources, whatever Ethan needs, but only if you're the one leading it. Linda stared at him. Why would you do that? Because you were right. About everything. About me not seeing my son. About me treating you like you were just... He couldn't finish. Just the help, she said quietly. You were never just anything. Silence stretched between them. Heavy, fragile. Linda looked down at her suitcase, at the keys in her hand, at the door she'd been about to walk through. If I stay, she said slowly, things have to change. They will, I promise. I don't want promises, Mr. Mill Richard. She lifted her chin. I want you to show up, for Oliver, for yourself, not just when something's wrong, every day. Richard nodded. I will. And I need you to trust me, really trust me, because I can't do this job wondering if you think I'm capable of hurting him. I do trust you. The front door swung open. Oliver stood there, backpack on, face pale. Daddy? His voice was small, scared. Why is Linda's suitcase out? Richard and Linda both froze. I thought. Oliver's eyes filled with tears. You said she could stay. You promised she wasn't leaving. Buddy, Oliver turned and ran. Not upstairs. Not to his room. Out the door. Down the driveway. Into the street. Oliver. Richard's heart stopped. A car horn blared. The car screeched to a stop inches from Oliver. The driver, an elderly woman, sat frozen, hands gripping the wheel, face white with shock. Oliver stood in the middle of the street, chest heaving, tears streaming down his face. Richard reached him first, dropping to his knees, hands running over Oliver's arms, his face checking for injuries that weren't there. Are you okay? Are you hurt? Oliver shook his head, sobbing. Linda appeared beside them, breathless. Oliver, baby, what were you thinking? You were leaving. Oliver's voice came out in a wail. I saw your suitcase and you were leaving, and I thought if I wasn't here you'd stay. If I left instead, you wouldn't have to go. The words shattered something in Richard's chest. Oh, sweetheart. Linda pulled Oliver into her arms. That's not how this works. You don't leave. You never leave. But Daddy said you had to go, and I don't want you to go. And Oliver's words tumbled over each other, broken and desperate. Richard's throat closed. He looked at this little boy, his son, falling apart in the street because the one person who made him feel safe was walking away. Because Richard had driven her away. I'm not going anywhere, Linda said, holding Oliver tight. You hear me? I'm staying. Oliver pulled back, eyes red and swollen. Promise? Linda looked at Richard. The question in her eyes was clear. Can I promise that? Richard nodded, his own eyes burning. I promise, Linda whispered, kissing Oliver's forehead. The elderly woman finally got out of her car, shaking. Is he all right? Oh my God, I almost... He's okay, Richard said, voice hoarse. Thank you for stopping. She pressed a hand to her chest. I was praying the whole way down this street to drive careful. God must have been listening. Richard looked at Oliver in Linda's arms, at the way his son clung to her like she was the only solid thing in his world. God must have been listening. Maybe he had been. All along. Let's get you inside, buddy, Richard said softly. They walked back to the house together, Oliver between them, holding both their hands. The suitcase still sat by the door. Linda walked past it without looking. Inside, Oliver finally stopped crying. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, then looked up at Linda. Can I still learn the signs for Ethan? Linda smiled through her tears. Every single day if you want. Oliver nodded. Then he turned to Richard. Daddy, will you learn too? Richard's breath caught. You want me to? Yeah, so we can both talk to him. Together. Richard looked at his son, really looked at him. At the hope in his eyes. At the courage it took to ask. Yes, Richard said. I'll learn. Oliver's face broke into the first real smile Richard had seen in months. And Linda looked at Richard with something that wasn't quite forgiveness yet, but it was close. That night, after Oliver was asleep, Richard sat at the kitchen table. Linda appeared in the doorway, 2 cups of tea in her hands. She set one in front of him without a word. Thank you, Richard said quietly. For staying. For everything. Linda sat across from him. I didn't stay for you. I know. I stayed for Oliver. And for Ethan. And because I think God wants me here. Richard nodded. Then I'm grateful he does. They sat in silence, the weight of the day settling around them. Finally, Linda spoke. There's something you need to know. Richard looked up. Ethan's mother called me an hour ago, Linda said. The school board meeting is tomorrow. They're voting on whether to keep Ethan enrolled or ask him to leave. Richard's jaw tightened. What? Principal Hartman pushed it through. Emergency session. Linda's hands wrapped around her mug. If they vote him out, he has nowhere else to go. This was his last chance. Then we stop them. How? Richard stood. I don't know yet. But we don't let that boy lose everything because adults are too afraid to try. Linda studied him for a long moment. You really mean that? Yes. Then you better be ready, she said quietly. Because this fight, it's just beginning. And Richard realized everything they'd been through, everything that had happened, it had all been leading to this. The school board meeting was packed. Parents filled every seat, standing room only in the back. Richard walked in with Linda beside him and Oliver holding his hand. Mrs. Torres sat in the front row, Ethan pressed against her side. Principal Hartman stood at the podium, reading from a prepared statement. While we value inclusion, we must prioritize the safety of all students. Given the incidents involving Ethan Torres, the board recommends, I'd like to speak. Every head turned. Richard walked to the front, Oliver still holding his hand. My name is Richard Miller. My son Oliver is in Ethan's class. He paused, looking at the faces staring back at him. 2 weeks ago, Ethan pushed my son. Oliver has bruises. He was hurt. Murmurs rippled through the room. Mrs. Torres's face crumpled. And I was angry, Richard continued. I wanted someone to blame, someone to punish, because that's easier than asking why a child would lash out in the first place. He looked down at Oliver, who nodded up at him. But my son, my 7-year-old son, he asked, a different question. He asked how he could help, how he could understand. And that question changed everything. Richard's voice strengthened. Ethan isn't violent. He's isolated. He spent his whole life in a world that doesn't speak his language, and we're punishing him for being frustrated. We're punishing him for being deaf. Mr. Miller, one board member interrupted, we understand your compassion, but this isn't compassion. This is basic human decency. Richard gestured to Linda. This woman taught my son sign language in 3 days. 3 days. And you're telling me a school full of trained educators can't do the same? Principal Hartman's face flushed. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. Richard looked directly at the board. I'm offering to fund everything. Training, interpreter, resources, whatever Ethan needs, and whatever future students like him will need, but only if he stays. Silence. And if he doesn't? One board member asked. Then I pull Oliver. And I'll make sure every parent in this district knows that Westridge Preparatory expelled a child for being deaf. The room erupted. Principal Hartman tried to restore order, but it was too late. Oliver tugged on Richard's sleeve. "Daddy, can I say something?" Richard looked down, surprised. "You want to speak?" Oliver nodded. Richard lifted him up so everyone could see. Oliver's small voice carried across the room. "Ethan's my friend, and friends don't give up on each other." Then Oliver looked at Ethan and signed, slowly, carefully, the words Linda had taught him. F-R-I-E-N-D. F-O-R-E-V-E-R. Ethan's eyes went wide. Tears spilled down his cheeks. He signed back, hands shaking. T-H-A-N-K-Y-O-U. Mrs. Torres broke down, sobbing, and the board voted. Unanimously, Ethan stayed. 3 months later, Richard stood in the back of Oliver's classroom watching something he never thought he'd see. 22nd graders signing good morning to each other. To Ethan. Ethan sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by friends, laughing silently at something another boy signed. Oliver caught Richard's eye and waved. Richard waved back, throat tight. Linda appeared beside him. "You're here." "I'm here," Richard said. "Every Friday, just like I promised." She smiled. "He's doing well. Because of you." Linda shook her head. "Because of him. And you. And God, putting us all in the right place at the right time." Richard watched his son, watched Ethan, watched a classroom full of children who'd learned that differences weren't something to fear. They were something to embrace. "I'm sorry," Richard said quietly, "for everything I said that first day, for how I treated you." Linda looked at him. "You were protecting your son." "No, I was protecting my fear." He turned to face her. "But you taught me what it really means to see people, to show up, to love like God loves." Linda's eyes filled. "Richard, you're family now," he said. "Not the help, not the housekeeper. Family, and I need you to know that." She wiped her eyes, smiling. "I already knew." Oliver ran over, Ethan right behind him. "Daddy, Ethan wants to come to our house for dinner. Can he?" Richard looked at Ethan, who signed hopefully. "Of course he can," Richard said. Linda translated. Ethan's face lit up. Mrs. Torres appeared in the doorway, work uniform on, exhausted but smiling. "Thank you," she said to Richard, "for everything." "Thank me?" Richard shook his head. "Your son taught mine what courage looks like. We're the ones who should be thanking you." And as they all walked out together, Richard, Oliver, Linda, Ethan, and Mrs. Torres, Richard realized something. He'd spent 3 years believing grief meant building walls, but God had sent Linda to show him the truth. Healing meant building bridges, and sometimes the people we think we're saving end up saving us instead.